Hi everyone, and welcome to part two of Recruitment in 2025, a Q&A with Justin McGuire. We are so excited to run this session today. We've already had absolutely tons of questions come in for Justin, so we'll be putting all of those to him today. But if you've not submitted your questions yet, it's not too late. There's a chat function which you'll be able to put them in, and we'll get all of those questions to Justin. Before we crack on, for anyone who doesn't know you, Justin, can you give a quick introduction?
Hello, everyone. Yes, my name is Justin McGuire. I am the CEO and founder of MCG Talent, a recruitment business for the Marcoms creative and digital world. It's been in existence in the Middle East for 15 years and in the Asia Pacific region for 9 years now. I've been in the actual recruitment and communications world, though, for over 20 years. So been pretty much, been around the block, got the grey hair to prove it. And I've seen, different markets in that time in the Middle East. So certainly seen different times in Asia Pacific as well. So I want to, I can come at this with experience and I want to help as many people as possible. And that's why we're doing today.
Perfect, amazing. So Justin will be answering all of those questions, and I'm going to hand over to Laura now, who will be the chat master. She will be the person receiving all the questions, so she's going to go through how you'll be able to get your questions over to Justin and a few more housekeeping rules for today.
Hi everyone. So I'm Laura and I'm going to be just running through some housekeeping rules with you. If you do have to dash off, a recording will be available after the session for all registrants. But if you do stay with us on the live, you'll be able to ask us questions in real time using the chat function. To find that, if you give your mouse a wiggle at the bottom of the screen, it should say chat. Click that and you can pop your questions in there at any point during the webinar. The questions will be completely anonymous. Only myself and the panelists will see them and who they've come from. So don't be shy. We'll answer as many as possible. And to get used to us using that chat function, I'm going to begin by asking you a question and you can pop your answers in. So the question I'm going to ask you is, what did you find most challenging about the job market in Q1?
Perfect. While those answers come in, I'll just quickly run through the agenda so you know what is going to be coming up in today's session. So we'll start off with Q1 reflections. I'm going to ask Justin a couple of questions about how Q1 has went. We'll then go to Q&A where we'll answer the questions that you've submitted. Next, we'll have candidate and hiring behaviour. Then we'll go back to Q&A. So again, you'll get your questions answered, and then we'll go through some Q2 trends and advice before going to our final Q&A. So as you can see, there's going to be lots of chances to get your questions answered. And we'll start with going over to Laura to see what some of the answers to that first question were.
So we're getting quite a lot of answers about difficulty to secure an interview, not being enough roles or being too many applicants, not being able to stand out. So they're all things that we're going to cover in this session. So I think we should get started.
Perfect. All right, let's get started then. So, Justin, your first question is from me, and that is, we've just wrapped up Q1. How would you sum up the job market over the past 3 months?
How would I sum up the job market? The job market has been, look, I think it's actually been a bit in the Middle East. It's been good for us in the sense that there's been a steady number of jobs, but crazy in the sense that there's obviously so many applicants looking at the moment. And also, I think it's a region where there's a great deal of interest in the region right now. I think it's one of the regions that's bucking the trend when it comes to how the global economy is faring up. So there's a lot of eyes on this part of the world right now, on the GCC specifically, but there is very still limited supply of jobs given the size of the market. In the Asia Pacific region, where obviously we also have a business, what we're seeing is the market still recovering from a somewhat subdued past couple of years. We're seeing more jobs coming in. But obviously today we saw the tariffs from President Trump come in. So we're seeing a degree of, there's a great deal of things affecting confidence, and recruitment thrives within confidence, okay? And I would say even with the Middle East right now, there's a degree of nervousness in some positions because people don't quite know where the world's going, the direction things are going. And that isn't good for business. That isn't good for recruitment. So I've planned this year for not for our business, not a year of extreme growth. If anything, I've planned for a steady year. I don't and it's tracking already after Q1 that I suppose my thoughts on how the year is going to show out are proving to be true. We've certainly seen in markets that were very dynamic and growing at pace last year, like Saudi. We've definitely seen an adjustment there, a much more focus on localized hiring. PIF have obviously announced that they're scaling back on funding on certain projects, etc. So there's quite a number of candidates that have come into the market from that space, particularly expatriate candidates. And there's also all eyes coming into the Dubai and Saudi from the expat market outside the region. So there's a real supply demand issue there. In the Asia Pacific region, I think we're just seeing it's more of a traditional slowdown and the recovery that's starting to come from that.
Okay, perfect. And then kind of within those regions, has there been any sectors that kind of stood out as like clear winners or real kind of strugglers for the first quarter of the year?
Yeah, good question. So what we've seen, from our holistic view from our business, which obviously is niche and specialist, we're certainly seeing any sort of international business. So for us, that could be a big advertising group. We're certainly seeing a slowdown on those side, but businesses that are rooted in the Middle East region, they seem to be pretty resilient and moving and hiring. Businesses like the SME market in the Middle East has been remarkably strong for us. But international, which was typically our old, like I say a decade ago, our typical client pot, has definitely slowed down. Over in the Asia Pacific region, everyone's starting to come back together, but we're certainly seeing the tech sector prove to be particularly strong. In the Middle East, the real estate market, particularly the GCC, is strong. Fintech, strong. We're seeing a big move into the fintech and crypto space and more businesses moving here. So technology strong. More of the traditional sectors, retail, we're seeing some retail markets moving. So I think in the Middle East, it seems to be that the standouts are the real estate and the fintech market. The traditional financial services, less so. And in Asia Pacific, I would say technology for us has been the mover.
Perfect. And then last question for me before we go to the Q&A. You mentioned that there's kind of a rise in candidates looking to relocate to UAE, Saudi, and then candidates that are already in the region looking for new jobs as well. Would you say that that has impacted the expectations of employers when it goes to them looking for new candidates to fill roles? Would you say that there's kind of higher expectations than previously?
I mean, obviously it depends on the individual, the hiring manager, but we're certainly seeing people now heavily negotiating on salaries. So we're not seeing, I think this has been reported on as well, but I contributed to some of those articles. We're definitely not seeing some of the steep pay rises that we were seeing 2-3 years ago. If anything, we're probably seeing a flattening of salaries and a reduction. Over in the Asia Pacific region, salaries are remaining pretty flat there, unless it's high demand skills, which are like, for example, in the tech sector, where there's still a global skill shortage in that space. The main issue that I'm seeing right now is that Middle East businesses aren't growing at the rate the amount of candidates want to come in. So there is not enough jobs to fulfill the demand. The simple sums don't add up, and there's people used to come to Dubai, for example. People used to come to the GCC countries and go, I'll come for 2 years and then I'll go home. They don't do that anymore. People come here for 8 to 10 years at least. People come to improve their quality of their life. There is a settled and an established market on the ground that is looking for jobs, or that may have lost their job and is active, combined with this windfall of jobs of job seekers coming in from the international market. That has created a real slowdown in particularly the UAE market for candidates looking. There isn't, I used to say to people, if you want to get a job in Dubai or Abu Dhabi, get on a plane, go out there. And if you get in people's faces, you're likely to get a job. That is not the case anymore, because there's a great deal of people that are doing that and still struggling, because there's a great deal of supply in market already. In the APAC market, it's still an employer's market, because reality is the market is still just, getting out of what has been quite a downward trend. There's also a dynamic shift over in places like Singapore and Hong Kong, where you're seeing expats not get their visas renewed in Singapore and then look to Dubai market to come in. Hong Kong, because of obviously the Chinification, should we say, or the perceived Chinification, there has been less expats wanting to come in that market, so it's become very localized as well. So they're very particular on language requirements, and in Singapore, just the demand is beginning to come back. In Saudi, you're just seeing the demand there is for nationals, and nationals are in for quite a few of the skills that we get briefed on. They're in shorter supply.
All right, perfect. Thank you so much, Justin. I'm going to hand over to Laura now, who's going to put forward some of your questions that you've put in the chat. We can see that there's a lot of them, so we'll try and get through as many as we can.
Yes. Okay, there's been lots and lots of questions. So there's been a lot of questions about salaries. So what I'm going to do shortly is share our 2025 recruitment market guide, which you can download. And then you can check out salaries, because we obviously can't answer everybody's individual salary questions. So one that was interesting though is, does having a UAE golden visa impact job applications? Do employers view you as an expensive proposition, since you need to be in a certain salary bracket to get the visa?
Honestly, we haven't, for us, we work mid to senior level hires. We haven't seen a lot of people send out CVs with golden visa holder. I think sometimes this can be beneficial if you're looking in Abu Dhabi, where getting a visa can be a bit slower than Dubai, but it's not something we're seeing as a major impact for whether someone gets a job or not.
Okay. Next question. Does having a strong local/UAE experience still matter? And if so, how much does it matter?
It puts you up in the pecking order right now, and that's the thing. You've got different buckets of people looking. You've got the nationals, i.e. the UAE nationals, Kuwaiti nationals, Singaporeans, Saudis, etc. They take priority. Then you've got those expats with regional experience. They tend to, and with language skills capabilities, they tend to go just underneath that. Then you've got people on the ground without the language capabilities, regional experience. Then underneath that, you've got the new wave of people coming in who might have the relevant skill set, but don't have any regional experience at all. If you've got regional experience, you have to flag that as much as you possibly can. That gets you up the ladder, if you will, because there's a lot of people above you looking.
Okay, perfect. So aside from the UAE, which countries are expected, in your opinion, to have an increased demand for talent? People are looking in the Middle East. They want to know.
Obviously, we're saying this on a day that Mr. Trump's tariffs have come into effect. So it's going to be interesting to see how the next few months play out. My personal prediction on this is that we're probably going to see the next 3 to 4 months of disruption, and then things should start to settle. I believe that Saudi, is still an exciting market. There are opportunities there, but you have to be incredibly patient, and the opportunities there come are fewer and far between. UAE and specifically Dubai will continue to be the #1 expat market, but Dubai, everyone, it feels like the world and their friends want to work in Dubai right now. So it's just a very tough market to break into. There is multiple people looking, and what that's done is, particularly those that are looking from abroad, perhaps packing up, changing their lives, you're not going to get the big pay leaps you did. You're going to get a tax-free salary, but the cost of living it's being driven up. So it's making it, you've got to look at things from a long ball perspective now.
Okay, perfect. Right, I'm going to pass back to Sarah for our next section, because quite a lot of the questions that we're getting through, I know that we're going to be answering. So keep your ears open and eyes open for the answers that come from Justin now, and then we'll go back to another short Q&A after this section.
Great, thanks. So the first question that I have for you, Justin, on our second section is, What's the biggest mistake that you've seen job makers make in Q1? And if you had advice for them going into Q2, what are the things that people should do a bit differently to get noticed?
Look, if you're on the ground so for example, let's look at it in two different pots. I get invited, first of all, the LinkedIn messaging directly to recruiters. Please understand and put into perspective how many messages come through. I mean this not to show off, but I must get invited to 50 plus coffees per day, right? There simply isn't enough of a capability to respond on top of all other messages that you get from maybe candidates, clients, etc. That's just on LinkedIn. So I think the way you can get noticed is in person. And the great thing about Dubai is there's a significant amount of societies, clubs, events that happen where you can get in front of people. If you're in the GCC market, you've got to get networking. You've got to get friendly. You've got to get, I think, some old school going out, pounding the pavements, going to meet people is how you're going to do it. But I'm not talking about turning up uninvited at people's offices. I'm talking at turning out at industry events where you can get noticed. I'm seeing a lot of the people that I'm speaking to that are having success in that way. They're getting closer. I always say you're one person away from someone that can get you close to where you need to be, or from that job in Dubai. So you've got to try and attend as many industry events and societies and join them as you can. Talks, breakfasts, networking, go to them. Okay. Personal brand. There's still very few people that spend time building out their personal brand, talking about who they are, identifying themselves. It's such a great way of getting noticed. If you've got a good CV and you're commenting, you're being intelligent, you're actually putting some thoughtful responses forward, it's going to work for you. Okay. And I see this work time and time again. So those are the main things. If you're coming in from abroad, it's going to be a lot harder, right? So you really need to niche out what the skill set that you've got is going to make the difference there, okay? Because right now, if you've got Netherlands experience, UK experience, German experience, France experience, it's just not deemed priority, okay? And I'm seeing businesses that 2-3 years ago would be very open to this, just shutting that down now. They just don't need that. They've got enough people with regional experience applying in. So for that one, you've got to be extraordinarily patient, and you've got to make sure that the skill sets that you're putting across are completely relevant for any job that you see advertised or for a business that you choose to approach. Okay. And the way you'll get noticed by them is by, again, building out your personal brand, being impactful, being insightful in that way. Not pestering people, not hammering every 2 seconds, not pleading or going for the sympathy vote, which I sometimes get. You've got to be very tactical, and you've got to be very patient. Now, the other thing I just want you to know is reality is in Saudi. Like, if you're looking to try and get into the Saudi market, it's the nationalization quotas are very tough to break. Not many businesses are looking to that. And if they're very, you're not going to, if you're looking to get a job in Saudi, you're not going to it's not going to be one that's going to pay your mortgage off right now either. Things have leveled out again because of the supply demand. And that's something I want people to be aware of as well. You need to be realistic with your salary expectations if you're coming into the market. And if a recruiter's reaching out to you and you're one of the lucky ones, go bite their arm off for the job, honestly, because once you've got the regional experience, you become a premium product.
Perfect. And then in terms of kind of employer behaviors, have you noticed any shifts in like perm versus freelance? Obviously the UAE GCC has historically been a bit more perm focused. Have you seen any kind of shift happening there for more contract or freelance roles?
There's a demand in both regions for freelance, but there's a lack of supply. And people might say, hang on, I do freelance, but you need to be legally able to do freelance. And there just simply isn't enough people that legally are able to do that. Okay. So permanent is still the dominant force for our markets in the UAE. But what we are seeing is that the interview processes have certainly taken longer. They're extended. And I believe that's because there's a degree of uncertainty in the air. I believe I was talking to a client earlier today, and we both are of the belief that the GCC kind of boom that we've just experienced has come to an end. I think we believe the market is now going to become, there's still going to be opportunities, but it's not going to be at the trajectory it was post-COVID. Oil price, we can see it's not at the heights that it once was before. And if the reality is, if the oil price is not up high, then less money is going to be coming into the market. Saudi operates more or less on a cash flow basis. So if Aramco is doing well, if oil price is high, Saudi spends. If the price goes down, things tend to flatten. UAE, whilst it has a more diversified portfolio, it is also impacted by less money coming through. And you'll just get global uncertainty, which we're kind of hearing right now. While I think things will be on the long run here good, I believe there is going to be an impact on the pace of hiring.
Perfect. And then for both MENA and APAC, have you seen any shift this year in the in-office versus hybrid and flexible working models?
Yeah, there seems to be a drive going back to the office from those that went very hybrid. And I believe that that's potentially a mistake if you're looking to get great talent. For me, I'm a believer, and from talking to a lot of people in our clients, what works for them is the hybrid model. So a degree of flexibility shown and a middle ground where the team can get together, collaborate, but then also have their own time and freedom and flexibility to work around that. Again, if you're a sales house or reliant on a junior part of team or junior folks coming into your team, I don't think it works with juniors sat at home working without having anyone to learn from. So those people tend to be in the office. On the whole, though, we're seeing most people have a flexible approach.
All right, perfect. So that's the end of our second section. So I'm going to hand back over to Laura, who's going to go through some of the questions that have came through on that section.
Okay, I'm just going to run through a few again, then we'll go to our third section, then we'll have time for a longer Q&A at the end for those of you that keep your questions coming. So to start with, we touched upon personal branding in that section. Is personal branding relative to the industry that they're in just as important as CV content?
I believe that it's what you find now is when you're applying for a job, what people will do is they'll look at your CV, but then they'll also look at your LinkedIn profile. So they'll dual study if they're interested in you, and they want to see that things correlate, things match, and they'll also be interested in your thoughts and opinions and to see how active you are. Okay, so I find this for basically all our clients, be it in Asia or in the Middle East, they take a dual approach now to looking. Some clients just want us to send a LinkedIn profile, but they send a dual approach. So I think it's imperative that you actually put your thoughts, opinions on your, and share relevant content, because people will look at that. People will study that. Okay. You've got to make sure your CV, 2 pages, keep it clean. I'm a firm believer in role, responsibility, and achievements clearly listed on each job. So there's a clear pattern there. And then make sure that your LinkedIn profile is more or less aligned with that. And you're also expressing opinions within that could make people deem you interesting, and also just show that how you differentiate from others.
Perfect. And on that theme of personal branding, what advice would you give as the personal branding guru to someone to take action in order to kickstart their personal brand on LinkedIn if they're particularly
Look, aside from the obvious, have a good professional picture, clear idea of who you are as a person, your about section filled in. People will then look at your social activity to get a sense of who you are as a person. Make sure that your professional profile is filled out and it matches what's on your CV. But the other thing I would do is, and I've seen quite a few people, particularly because of the way the world is quite inflamed right now, is avoid derogatory comments on people. Avoid politicizing your profile. Okay. I've seen this happen in APAC, and I've seen this happen in MENA, where people are really putting political commentary, and a lot of businesses want to steer clear of that. Now, I fully appreciate you might have thoughts and opinions, but that can be quite off-putting for an employer.
Yeah. Okay. A few people are asking about remote roles in the UAE. I know that you said quite a lot of people are starting to go back into the office, but is the UAE open to people who are remote for remote roles?
In technology, we're seeing, I would say, Dubai and Singapore, to a degree, are following similar patterns of being quite hybrid. But I'm seeing less people want to employ people from abroad rather than people who are actually in the market. So the days of honestly, I can know from our job sheet now, there's barely any on either where we've got clients looking for remote workers for jobs within those two parts of the world, for example. Same for Riyadh, and same. Hong Kong is still quite a traditional market. We don't really see much change there. But I would say for Riyadh and Dubai and Singapore, we're seeing very few.
Okay, perfect. Right, I'm going to pass back to Sarah for section 3, and then we'll have a bigger Q&A at the end.
Great, thank you. So this section is Q2 trends and advice. So we've just wrapped up Q1. With Q2, do you think that there's any key trends or changes that you see coming up?
Look, I think there's an expectation now for people to be AI literate and for people to use tools and technology. So I think that's something I think people should be aware of, that if every industry now is being digitized and disrupted. I think it's quite clear that if you've got an understanding of AI, if you can use it proficiently within your business, it's very much worth flagging that. One thing I would say as well that we're seeing is hiring is becoming hyper regionalized. I'm going to really sort of push down on this point even more. People really are interested with those that can hit the ground running, and that's because it's an employer's market. Okay, so I know some people might say, well, that counts me out. How am I going to do it? But if there's any way you've worked with a Middle East business or an Asia Pacific business, you've got to make it clear what your input was, what you understand about that, why you, even if you're not geographically based there, what you've done, anything that you can do to sort of to put you a little bit more in front of the pecking order, I would do that. Localized hiring is such a priority right now. And that is what most of my clients in either regions are focused on. We are seeing very few relocations, except for one industry that we work in, and that is the creative market, where they're still open to new, fresh ideas coming through. Everyone else, be it communications, marketing, digi, they're really looking for people who understand how their respective regions tick.
All right, and you mentioned that it's an employer's market at the moment. Are you seeing any kind of sectors where there's still people who are quite passive when it comes to searching for jobs? And is there still kind of sectors where employers are having to kind of fight that battle to secure people?
Yeah, in the senior searches that we cover, where there's this very specific on experience that they require, naturally there is demand there. But if I'm talking, I don't think that's relevant to most people. So, and I know for the purposes of this webinar, it's probably, I treat that as an exception, not the norm. I think most people here are going to be fighting for jobs in an employer's market, and I see that being this way for the remainder of the year across both territories.
All right, perfect. And we're getting a lot of questions about salaries here. You mentioned earlier that salaries have stabilized. Do you expect to kind of continue to see that for the rest of the year, that there won't be much movement on salaries, given that there's also kind of rising inflation costs? Do you think that we'll still see that stability and not a lot of movement?
I think there's a danger that could go down. The competition will increase in places like the Middle East, and in APAC. I think we're seeing a spike. Again, because of uncertainty, we might see a spike in inflation, but I can't see salaries keeping up with that. So it's a case of battening down the hatches and taking what you can and playing a long ball game.
Okay, perfect. And last question for you before we move to our long Q&A session. What's something that you're keeping a particularly close eye on and excites you about the talent market moving into Q2 and the rest of this year?
The thing I'm keeping an eye on at the moment is market conditions, to be honest with you, Sarah. I think obviously technology is the speed with which we can help find and access talent. That's there. But the bit that's drawing my attention now is, I think we're in a world where there's a lot of moving parts right now, and that's going to affect hiring. So anyone in recruitment, they need to keep close to their clients. People need to see what things are going to could change weekly. I think there are going to be winners and there are going to be losers in this, and that we need to know what they're going to be and what industries they're going to be moving into. I think there's going to be opportunities in both regions, but you're going to need to really tailor your skill set for that. And there's going to be some, like I said, there's going to be some clear avenues that are going to open up from all this. And right now we're still in the thick of it. But I think in 3-4 months we'll get a great deal of clarity from that. And that's the bit it's drawing most of my attention right now. The good news is we're having, even today, we've had the word on the street from the clients is that there's things are moving. They're cautiously keeping an eye on things, but things are moving as they are.
All right, perfect. Thank you so much. So I'm going to pass over to Laura now, who is going to handle the final Q&A. This is going to be the longest Q&A session, so make sure you get your questions in. If you want to get any questions answered by Justin, now is your chance. Over to you, Laura.
Thanks, Sarah. So like Sarah said, get your questions in. This is the last chance that you'll have to ask them to Justin live. So I'm going to just dive straight in with your questions. Very generally, what skills and certifications are in demand currently?
Look, when you say certifications, could you just be a bit, that's a very broad question. So to get a job in both of these both markets, typically you're expected to have a degree. Okay, those without a bachelor's degree tend to struggle unless you've got a significant amount of experience. So it's very hard for me. It's more on experience hiring, quite frankly, not on a certification right now. I don't think that's the type of recruitment that we're really involved in. We focus much more on experience and place the relevant people within the jobs on that. But like word to the wise, in places like Singapore, in places like Saudi, you will struggle to get a visa if you don't have the necessary educational qualifications. That's how the market is.
Okay. And for skills, in terms of soft skills, is there anything that you think is really, really important in today's markets?
In terms of soft skills, look, everyone wants to work with, like, it's the basic stuff. Anyway, everyone wants to work with someone that's, that's approachable, that comes across well, that's nice, amiable within the interview. So, those are the types of people who want enthusiastic, hungry individuals. They don't want, prima donnas or people that think the world, the arrogant. Don't be arrogant. Don't be arrogant in interviews. Like, that's just the number one thing I'm going to get advice I can give anyone, right? Is that people want someone that can slot well into their team or is a real go-getter. The reality is most people want people who can add to their bottom line right now in any way, shape, or form as well. So you've got to show that you're willing to roll your sleeves up to any job that you're applying for. That's the number one thing we always get briefed on at the moment, is we want people who can roll their sleeves up. So you demonstrate how you can get in the thick of it, how you're still incredibly hands-on. People, this isn't a market where hands-off people are in high demand. Strategic thinkers in some roles, yes, but most people want them to get their hands dirty. I was just out with the CEO and he's, still involved in pitches, etc. And that's what these markets are about. The emerging world that likes people that are hands-on and gritty.
Okay, perfect. Lots to go off there. So next question is about CVs and ATS systems. What is the effect of ATS systems on applications? Do people need to tailor their CVs?
Yeah, the key thing that you need to do, and we spoke about this in the last one, is it needs to look as relevant as is humanly possible, to the job that you're applying. And if it doesn't, if the keywords aren't in there, if it's not screaming out, like take the pictures, take the graphics out of it, make sure it's completely relevant and tailored to the job that you're applying. And because the ATS it will do a keyword search run, and if it's not picking up what it needs to, you'll get left.
Okay. Next question is about recommendations. Are recommendations still really important to find a new role if they've got somebody within the company that's rooting for them? Yeah.
I mean, that's a cheat code for getting a job. If you've got someone internally that can refer you in, absolutely. Just utilize that as much as you possibly can. That'll get you ahead of the pecking order.
Okay, perfect. And what helpful advice can you give candidates of age in today's even more difficult hiring climate?
It's tough. I'm not going to lie. That's tough. There is, I'm afraid to say I'm seeing a degree of ageism in hiring that's come when there are that many people applying right now. We're seeing a degree of ageism it will kick in there, and that's tough. So again, focus more on skills, focus more on what you can bring to the table, how hands-on you are. That's something you really need to button down on. And look, if you can show how hands-on and agile, I think there's a perception still that people of a certain age, and by the way, I'm not far off, I'm 45 years old, so I fall firmly into that bucket that's being discriminated. You've got to prove that you're hands-on, that you're involved, that you're not looking for a big cushy salary and to not step back. But typically those, people of a certain age come with responsibilities and come with requirements they need to fulfill from a family perspective. So they tend to want quite a lot of money. And if you can be as flexible as possible on that, you're going to give yourself as maximum opportunities.
Now this person's going to probably love our next webinar, but how do people go about reaching recruiters who are hiring for senior executive roles?
They are in incredibly high demand. Probably the pot where I'm getting, because I've been in the industry a long time, and maybe because I'm a certain age, I get a lot of senior people approaching me. There are a lot of seniors looking at the moment. The reality is, for senior assignments, mostly they're assigned to recruiters on a headhunting basis. So it's not like, you can reach out, but just understand that there's a lot of people reaching out, and that you need to be patient and wait for a reply back, because you can't, executive search firms or executive search consultants which I'm one of them. We're often the roles where we are briefed on a particular skill sets and very high demand. Particular skill sets without, and very niche. And so you need to be patient and wait like 6 months to a year. Sometimes it can take. So just, reach out, share value if you can. Like, I think there's everyone, because they're looking for a job, there's a take. If you can give something to someone that might be of value, it's a great way of getting noticed. I think that's everyone's looking for something right now, and if you're willing to offer something, be it your time, be it something that you've noticed, being a piece of information, being a lead for a client, if it's a recruitment agency, just giving like some subtle examples here, then that could help you get noticed and engage in conversation. If you know someone that they know, or someone that they've placed, and you mention like someone in common, that could also help get the recruiter's attention. But there is just, there's a lot of people reaching out right now, and please just do understand that.
There's a lot of good actionable tips there. But on that note of having more experience and being more senior in the market, how far do you think people should outline in their CV if they've got, say, 15, 20, 30 years of experience? How far back do they go?
Look, you've got to be straight about how much experience you've got. If you take a chunk of your career off your CV and then someone cross-references it with your LinkedIn and it doesn't look right, unfortunately, sometimes that can work in reverse and it can raise suspicions, okay, that something's not quite right. So you put everything in there.
Okay, perfect. Do you think it's more valuable for candidates at the moment to work with recruiters or apply directly to companies?
The honest answer to that is both, right? Because there are some businesses that do work with recruiters, and there's some that don't, or there's some that struggle to hire themselves, then bring in recruiters, or there's some that confidentially put business out to recruiters. Look, the number one message I'm hearing from both candidates and from a lot of recruiters, be it in-house or agency, is that there's just the volume is what people are struggling with. Okay, the absolute volume it's getting to see the good people in LinkedIn have made it so darn easy to apply now that there's just the bombardment is insatiable. So you've got to, that's why I said if there's networking events and opportunities, you've got to go and attend those. I mean, we've hosted breakfasts when we released our salary survey. There were people that arrived and turned up and were looking, and we were able to engage face to face. There are opportunities always to meet people face to face. And I think that's the best way you can try and get noticed in a very crowded market, or you can have to use your network of relationships with people to play you in. But please be patient, because there's a lot of people looking right now. And some businesses, even if they think you're great, they It just don't, the demand's right there. It might not be there right now. And you have to wait until a slot opens up. You know, businesses in the GCC and in the APAC region, they're not at the scale that they are in you know, in the US or in Europe in many instances. And that reality is you're just going to have to wait it out.
Okay. Now the cover letter, we spoke about this in our last webinar as well, but the cover letter, do you think there's a need for that still in the Middle East, or do you think cover letters are not really useful anymore?
Yeah, I think a random cover letter fired in with a CV just gets overlooked now. It seems to be a waste of time. I think when there's of interest, or when you're engaged with a recruiter, putting examples of where your career and experience is relevant based on practical work that you've done, that works. But a random, dear hiring manager, I'm really keen on your job, blah blah blah. Those days, for me, I think they're good done. I don't know anyone that craves for a covering letter, any hiring managers that crave for a covering letter either.
Okay. This question was asked earlier in the chat, but I've sort of saved it till the end. Generalist or specialist, what do you think companies want now? Would they prefer someone who wears many hats, who's a generalist, or has a very niche specialism, one area that they are a pro in?
Well, it's obviously this is a hard one to answer. I don't know what the job is, but I would say how niche. Everyone wants a regional niche specialist, yeah, and for the work that we do. So I would go with niche, but again, that's very hard for me to say from the overall context.
Tricky question. Okay, the last question that I've got that's different from the others is, how do you get through to a new company when your job title doesn't reflect what you currently do?
Currently, it's very hard to do that. You stick within your niche and with your vertical. This isn't a market in an employer's market. This isn't a market where you're easily going to be able to change what you want to do and find another job. I don't think that's going to be possible. So I would say that you're making what is a difficult situation even harder. Okay.
Okay. Perfect. I think we've got through pretty much all of those questions, and we've grouped some together and answered them more generally. So hopefully everybody took something from what you've answered and had their questions answered as well at the same time. I'm going to pass back to Sarah now to close up.
Guys, just before we do, I think I'm willing to give a bit more time if you want, just to kind of fire out a few more. I think there's a lot of questions here that I still haven't. Someone's asked, what's the current job market with CMO type roles in UAE and Southeast Asia? I can tell you that they're there, but they're in high demand. They're the ones that we've worked, skill sets, they're very specific skill sets, and the closure rate's taking anywhere between 2 to 4 months. Okay, so you're going to need to play a bit of a long ball game there. Mostly in the tech market is where we've seen those come through right now, for anyone that's asking that. Someone's asked any virtual networking events I can attend since I'm moving to Dubai in a couple of months. Look, virtual networking events, there's a ton of them. What I recommend you do is join LinkedIn groups and join Facebook groups. They're a real cheat code, okay? That's where you can get to network within communities before you want to move anywhere. This is something I did when I moved to Singapore. It's something my wife and I do now living in Dubai. Go and network within the groups, the community groups that are there, to see if there's opportunities that come up there. You'll be amazed. You'll learn a lot about the region. You'll see that there could be some opportunities that creep up there. So I hope that tip could help. Is there anything else there, Laura, we want to go through that I perhaps haven't covered? I'm conscious that we've been very Middle East focused. Is there anything Asia specific that we want to throw in there?
Let's have a little look. Any Asia questions? Get them in now. Now's your chance.
We've had someone ask, how can someone with a background in comms find a job in this field in Hong Kong if they don't have Mandarin? Is that going to be an issue? Are Mandarin speakers very in demand right now in those markets?
Yeah, that's a good question. And the reality is, yes, they are compared to before. Mandarin, Cantonese, trilingual, Mandarin, Cantonese, and English is very much what the demand is at the moment. Unless it's highly skilled, and in this market at the moment, the majority that we're seeing go is to those with Mandarin experience. So, expats looking for a job in Hong Kong right now, it can be you have to be very patient. It can be quite a drawn out process.
Someone's also asked, is there national quotas in place in Hong Kong?
There is to a degree, but we've, like, for example, since COVID, Hong Kong has been quite flexible on visas. So we've not had many issues in Hong Kong when it comes to getting expat visas. The tougher market is Singapore. And because of the competition sometimes that Singapore and Hong Kong have, you'll find that Hong Kong made it a little bit easier when Singapore make it a little bit harder, right? At the moment, like businesses are finding it easier to scale through non-nationals through Hong Kong than they are in Singapore.
Okay, this was an interesting question as well. Should people be open to looking at innovative CVs, like gamified CVs or interactive CVs? Do you think that would go down well with our...
No, I'm not seeing any demand for that whatsoever. If anything, it's focusing on your skill sets, and people are LinkedIn profiles have played an increasingly more important role in the whole process, and make sure that's looking great and polished, and in turn make sure your CV is quick and to the point. People scan, like, think about how many CVs people are getting seen right now. If yours is graphs, pictures, pie charts, it's going to be complicated. It's just going to be bypassed. So make sure, keep it in the 2 pages, like I said, and get the keywords clear from the start.
Perfect.
There's been a lot of questions about moving. I've noticed from seeing here, Laura, that there's been a lot of questions that we try to answer from international people looking abroad. And this is the toughest one for me to answer, because the reality is there isn't the demand that I think people are hoping for. I think typically people have seen that they've been able to look at the APAC and GCC markets as places where they can get jobs as expatriates. And it's just a darn sight harder than it was before. And there is nothing I can say that's going to make that easier, because the demand right now isn't there unless it's a really specialized job. So that one, I think there isn't the reason people aren't coming back to your jobs. Reason people aren't coming back to you on messaging, etc. is there's just a lot of people regionally looking, combined with those internationally, and it's just not deemed priority for a lot of people. And that is something I'm sorry to say, but that's just the truth.
Okay. There was another question from a fellow CEO in this field, and he wondered about the interworkings of the team and how you structure your team.
Who's that then? Sorry?
So this came through an email, and he was keen to know how you structure the team here at MCG.
My recruitment team. So we have a team that work on ground in our different markets, and then we have an offshore team that support that, and then we have a marketing team, a global marketing team that then supports that entire framework as well. So we're onshore and offshore with a marketing framework around that. If that person wants to email me personally, I'll gladly interact with them and answer some more questions.
Perfect.
Anything more from talent that we haven't covered?
We had a question around, in a market that's constantly shifting, how do you make sure that you're future-proofing your talent that you bring on?
That you're future-proofing your talent. Okay. Always, like, and make sure you've got a team of youth and experience is what I would recommend, because there's technology. I mean, we know this from ourselves as a recruitment business, that the interns and the people that we bring in at the junior end are so au fait with new tools and technology that we may, us old dinosaurs, all right, me, the old dinosaur, is perhaps not unaware of. And that is really when you fuse that experience with the new ideas, that's when you can become really dangerous as a business.
All right, and then you touched on this earlier, but an interesting topic. How important is AI experience and knowledge in the market right now?
I think it's becoming ever more. I don't think I know. It's becoming ever more prevalent. People want to, if you can bring a competitive advantage to that business through your knowledge, understanding of tools and tech, you will jump the queue.
All right, and then someone's also asked, if you don't have as much regional experience, is it easier to get hired by a startup or a smaller company than it is to get hired maybe by, like a global player in the region?
I think that's a fair question. Startups, SMEs tend to hire scrappy, so the answer to that is yes. But if you're abroad and you're coming in from a different market, I mean, you're going to have to at least be on the ground. I think. See what startups tend to want. I'll give you an example. The type of hires that startups make in that instance are people that are here, like for example, in Singapore, in Dubai, in Riyadh, looking for a job, and they don't have to worry about bringing them out, relocating them, visaing them, all this added costs. They're already here. Then it's an easier hire. But if they've got to then do that and then compromise and get visas, etc., it's a tougher game. It's a tough game.
Okay. If you want to send in your final questions now, we've probably got time to answer one or two more. So if you've not had your question answered yet, then just pop it back in the chat and we'll get to it. Oh, lots coming through now. All right. Someone's talking again about changing industries. I guess very difficult in this market.
Yeah.
And then just one more thing, I guess I've seen this come up a couple of times. I think you answered it already a little bit. How can you really get forward, case studies on like what you've done and who you are, and how do you really stand out, maybe using things like LinkedIn to really showcase who you are when there's thousands of applications? What's like your number one tip to people to really get forward what they've done?
Okay, that's very interesting. I've seen it work two different ways, and this depends how someone wants to do it. And video can still be very powerful in this instance, like sharing who you are, what you've worked on through video. Not too long, maximum 1 minute 30 seconds. A video, like what you can offer, where you would go. Asking LinkedIn for help, telling people a bit more about yourself, that can work really well. Another way, and LinkedIn algorithm works very well towards carousels right now. So if you in a PDF format or can post who you are, what you're about in a carousel and what you've got to offer, again, the LinkedIn tends to like that and it tends to get pushed out quite well. So think about those as options. And by the way, like, when I said about cover letters, I don't think they're good. I think if you've got someone's attention and you're having a conversation, that's when you fire in the case studies. That's when you fire in the relevant experience. That's when you really fine tune it. Okay. That's when I really recommend you do that.
All right, last question. If you're currently abroad and your family is based here, you don't require sponsorship, does that improve your chances of being hired here?
No. At the moment, there's a lot of people in a similar space to you looking.
Right, perfect. I think that's pretty much, we've answered most of the questions. We've grouped a couple of them together, but hopefully we managed to get through as many of them as we possibly could. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us today. I hope that you find these sessions useful and you manage to get as many answers as you want when it comes to finding your next role. We do run these sessions pretty much monthly now, sometimes with different topics and focuses, so keep an eye out for our next one, and we'll also share invites to that over email. Big thank you to Justin for answering a lot of questions today. And to Laura for asking all of the questions to Justin that came through in the chat. If people want to stay connected with you, Justin, what's the best way for them to do that?
Look, I typically would say LinkedIn, but I'm sort of on trying to get my inbox managed myself at the moment. So best way probably to get me at the moment is to interact with my content. And being serious on that. So if you see me post, or if you see that, I'll try and interact with you on that, and that's a great way for us to engage. Okay.
Perfect. All right, we'll be sending out the recording of today's session so you can watch it back if you want to do so. And as I said, we'll send you an invite to the next one. Thanks so much for all your questions, and we'll see you next time.
Thanks.
Thanks, everyone.